There comes a moment in every life when a person must decide whether they will continue to live inside a cage, built by doubt, or step into the wide and waiting landscape of possibility. Many people spend years carrying thoughts that do not belong to them, thoughts handed down by fear, disappointment, rejection, failure, or the careless words of others. These thoughts settle quietly in the mind. They whisper that you are not enough. They insist that your mistakes define you. They convince you that tomorrow will look exactly like yesterday. But negative thinking is a thief. It steals joy before joy arrives. It steals opportunities before they are even seen. It steals confidence before a single step is taken. And the most dangerous thing about it is that it often speaks in a familiar voice, a voice that sounds so much like our own that we mistake limitation for truth. Yet there is another truth waiting beneath all that noise. It is the truth that your mind was not created to be a prison. It was created to be a place of imagination, resilience, and renewal. Every great change in human history began when someone refused to accept the story that fear was telling. Every personal victory began when an individual challenged the belief that they could not rise beyond their circumstances. Today, we gather around a simple but life-changing idea. You do not have to believe every thought that enters your mind. You have the power to question it, confront it, and replace it. You have the power to silence the voice that predicts defeat and strengthen the voice that calls you forward. Because the future does not belong to the person who never experiences negative thoughts. It belongs to the person who refuses to let those thoughts become their destiny. So as we begin, I invite you to examine the hidden corners of your thinking, to challenge the shadows that have overstayed their welcome, and to discover what becomes possible when you stop feeding fear and start believing in the strength that has been waiting inside you all along. Negative thinking often feels personal. It feels as though it was born inside us, shaped by our own flaws and weaknesses, and destined to remain a permanent part of who we are. But when we look closely, we discover something surprising. Many of the thoughts that limit us were not created by us at all. They were inherited. They came from experiences, environments, expectations, and voices that entered our lives long before we understood their influence. Like shadows cast across a room, they appear real and solid. Yet they are often only reflections of something standing elsewhere. A child who constantly hears criticism may grow into an adult who doubts every decision. Someone who experiences failure early in life may begin to believe that failure is their identity rather than a temporary event. A person who grows up surrounded by fear may learn to expect disappointment, even when opportunity is standing directly in front of them. Over time, these messages settle deep within the mind. They become familiar companions. Because they have been present for so long, they start to feel like truth. The danger lies in confusing familiarity with reality. Just because a thought has been repeated for years does not mean it is accurate. Just because a fear has accompanied you through difficult seasons does not mean it deserves authority over your future. Negative thinking often survives, not because it is correct, but because it is familiar. The mind tends to revisit what it knows, even when what it knows is harmful. Many people spend their lives fighting themselves when they should be questioning the stories they have accepted. They assume that every doubt reflects a personal weakness. They believe every insecurity reveals a hidden defect. Yet much of what we call negative thinking is simply the accumulation of old wounds, outdated beliefs, and borrowed fears. It is the echo of voices that once held power, but no longer deserve a place in the present. Your true identity exists beneath those layers. It exists beneath every criticism that made you question your worth. It exists beneath every disappointment that convinced you to expect less from life. It exists beneath every fearful prediction about what you can or cannot become. The essence of who you are is not found in the voice that tells you to shrink. It is found in the quiet strength that continues to hope, dream, and reach forward despite uncertainty. When you begin to understand that negative thinking is often an inherited shadow rather than a personal truth, something shifts. You stop treating every fearful thought as a command. You stop surrendering your future to assumptions formed in the past. You begin to recognize that thoughts can be examined rather than obeyed. You learn that the mind can carry beliefs that no longer serve its growth. And with that realization comes freedom, because what has been learned can be challenged, what has been inherited can be released, and what has been overshadowed can step into the light. The stories you tell yourself are among the most powerful forces shaping your life. Long before you speak to the world, you are speaking to yourself. Long before you make a decision, take a risk, or walk away from an opportunity, an internal narrative is already guiding your perception. These private conversations become the lens through which you interpret success, failure, relationships, and even your own potential. Whether you realize it or not, the story in your mind influences the reality you experience. Many people assume that circumstances alone determine their future. They look at their challenges and conclude that the facts of their situation are the only things that matter. Yet, two people can face the same obstacle and emerge with completely different outcomes. One sees the obstacle as proof that life is against them. The other sees it as evidence that growth is necessary. The difference often lies not in the challenge itself, but in the story attached to it. When negative thinking takes hold, it creates narratives that shrink possibility. A setback becomes a permanent defeat. A mistake becomes evidence of inadequacy. A rejection becomes a declaration of worthlessness. The mind begins collecting details that support these conclusions while ignoring everything that contradicts them. Soon, a person is no longer seeing life clearly. They are seeing life through a story that has already decided what is possible and what is not. These stories are rarely dramatic at first. They often begin as small assumptions. I am not talented enough. People like me never succeed. Things never work out for me. Repeated often enough, these statements become familiar. Familiarity turns them into beliefs, and beliefs influence actions. A person who believes they will fail may stop trying. Someone who expects rejection may avoid meaningful connections. Someone convinced of their limitations may never discover their strength. The story quietly becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, but the human mind possesses a remarkable ability. It can revise its narrative. It can challenge conclusions that were accepted without question. It can look at the same life and discover a different meaning. Failure can become education. Struggle can become preparation. Uncertainty can become opportunity. The facts may remain unchanged, but the interpretation transforms everything. This does not mean pretending difficulties do not exist. It does not mean replacing honesty with fantasy. Instead, it means refusing to allow negative assumptions to become the author of your life. It means recognizing that every experience contains more than one possible meaning. You have the ability to choose which meaning will guide your next step. The stories that empower growth are not built on denial. They are built on possibility. They acknowledge pain without surrendering to it. They recognize obstacles without worshiping them. They understand that a difficult chapter is not the entire book. When you begin telling yourself a story rooted in resilience, courage, and potential, your vision expands. You notice opportunities that fear once concealed. You discover strengths that doubt refused to recognize. You start acting in ways that align with who you can become rather than who you once believed you were. And gradually the world before you begins to change, because the world within you has changed first. Fear has a peculiar way of growing when it is left unexamined. It does not always arrive loudly or dramatically. More often, it enters quietly, settling into the corners of the mind where it can remain unnoticed. It disguises itself as caution, practicality, or realism. It whispers reasons to delay action, avoid risk, and remain hidden from uncertainty. Because its voice can sound reasonable, many people never question it. They simply obey it, allowing fear to shape decisions without realizing how much power they have surrendered. When fear remains in silence, it expands. It feeds on assumptions and unanswered questions. A small concern becomes a large worry. A temporary doubt becomes a permanent belief. The mind begins imagining outcomes that have not happened and may never happen. It creates stories of failure, rejection, embarrassment, and loss. The longer these stories remain unchallenged, the more convincing they become. Eventually, fear no longer feels like a possibility. It feels like a certainty. This is why awareness is so important. Awareness is the light that enters the room where fear has been hiding. The moment you become conscious of a fearful thought, you create distance between yourself and that thought. Instead of being controlled by it, you begin observing it. You ask questions. You examine its origins. You consider whether it is based on evidence or assumption. What once felt like an unquestionable truth becomes something that can be explored and understood. Courage does not appear in the absence of fear. Courage is born through awareness of fear. A person who never feels afraid has no opportunity to be courageous. True courage emerges when someone recognizes their fear clearly and chooses not to let it dictate their actions. It is the decision to move forward despite uncertainty. It is the willingness to take a step without guarantees. It is the quiet determination to act according to values rather than anxieties. Many people believe courage is reserved for extraordinary individuals, but courage often reveals itself in ordinary moments. It appears when someone speaks honestly after years of remaining silent. It appears when a person applies for an opportunity despite fearing rejection. It appears when someone begins again after experiencing failure. These actions may seem small from the outside, yet they represent profound victories over fear's influence. Awareness transforms the relationship between fear and action. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" a person begins asking, "What if I succeed?" Instead of assuming the worst outcome, they become open to other possibilities. They recognize that fear is often a prediction, not a prophecy. It can warn, but it cannot determine the future. Every meaningful achievement requires this shift. Growth demands movement beyond familiar boundaries. New opportunities require uncertainty. Personal transformation involves entering territory where outcomes are unknown. Fear will almost always accompany these experiences, but awareness prevents fear from becoming a master. It turns fear into information rather than authority. As you become more aware of your thoughts, emotions, and reactions, you discover that fear loses much of its power. What once seemed overwhelming becomes understandable. What once felt permanent becomes temporary. And in that growing awareness, courage finds space to emerge, strengthening with each choice to move forward even when certainty remains out of reach, and the path ahead is still unfolding in mystery and possibility. Reclaiming your mind is one of the most powerful acts of freedom a person can experience. It is a decision to take ownership of your thoughts rather than allowing old fears, limiting beliefs, or outside influences to dictate the direction of your life. Many people live without realizing how much of their mental world has been shaped by expectations they never chose. They carry opinions that were handed to them, fears that were taught to them, and doubts that were reinforced by difficult experiences. Over time, these influences become so familiar that they seem inseparable from identity itself. Yet the moment you begin questioning them, you begin the process of reclaiming your mind. True freedom is not only about external circumstances. A person can have opportunities, resources, and choices available to them while still feeling trapped by negative thinking. The prison is invisible, but its effects are real. It appears whenever someone convinces themselves they are incapable of growth. It appears when fear prevents action, when self-doubt silences ambition, and when old disappointments become reasons to stop believing in future possibilities. The chains may not be visible to others, but they are felt deeply by the person carrying them. Reclaiming your mind starts with recognizing that you are not obligated to accept every thought that enters your awareness. Thoughts are not commands. They are not always facts. They are often reflections of habits, memories, emotions, and past experiences. Some thoughts deserve attention, while others deserve examination. When you learn to distinguish between the two, you regain a measure of control that negative thinking once stole from you. This process is also an act of self-respect. Respecting yourself means believing that your future deserves more than the limitations of your past. It means refusing to define your worth by mistakes, failures, or the judgments of others. It means understanding that your mind is valuable territory and that what occupies it matters. Just as you would not allow a stranger to enter your home and damage everything inside, you should not allow destructive beliefs to occupy your mental space without challenge. Self-respect grows when you begin treating yourself with the same compassion and fairness you would offer someone you deeply care about. Many people speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to another human being. They magnify flaws, dismiss accomplishments, and focus endlessly on shortcomings. Reclaiming your mind requires interrupting this pattern. It requires replacing unnecessary self-condemnation with honesty, accountability, and understanding. Growth becomes easier when it is rooted in respect rather than shame. Every time you challenge a limiting belief, you strengthen your sense of freedom. Every time you choose possibility over defeat, you affirm your value. Every time you refuse to let fear make your decisions, you reclaim another part of yourself. These moments may seem small, but together they create a profound transformation. The mind gradually becomes a place of strength rather than struggle, a source of guidance rather than resistance. When a person reclaims their mind, they are no longer living according to the fears that once controlled them. They begin creating their own narrative, defining their own future, and honoring their own worth with every deliberate thought and every courageous choice they make along the way. A transformed mindset is not simply a collection of positive thoughts. It is a fundamental shift in the way a person sees themselves, their challenges, and their possibilities. When negative thinking dominates the mind, the world often appears smaller than it truly is. Opportunities seem distant, obstacles seem permanent, and the future feels limited by the disappointments of the past. The mind becomes focused on what might go wrong, what has already gone wrong, and why success may be reserved for someone else. This perspective quietly shapes behavior, influencing choices in ways that often go unnoticed. The moment a mindset begins to change, a different reality starts to emerge. Challenges are no longer viewed as proof of inadequacy, but as opportunities for growth. Failures are no longer treated as final verdicts, but as lessons that provide valuable direction. Setbacks lose their ability to define identity because they are seen as experiences rather than permanent labels. The individual begins to understand that every meaningful achievement requires persistence, adaptation, and patience. This transformation opens the door to purpose. Purpose is difficult to recognize when the mind is consumed by fear and self-doubt. Negative thinking narrows vision, making it difficult to see beyond immediate problems. A transformed mindset expands awareness. It encourages curiosity, exploration, and a willingness to pursue goals that once seemed unattainable. Instead of asking, "Why should I try?" a person begins asking, "What am I capable of becoming?" That question alone can alter the course of a life. Possibility grows wherever belief takes root. This does not mean believing that success will come easily, or that life will always unfold according to plan. It means believing that effort matters, growth is possible, and the future is not confined to present circumstances. People with transformed mindsets still encounter difficulties, but they approach those difficulties differently. They search for solutions instead of surrendering to problems. They remain open to opportunities instead of assuming defeat. They understand that uncertainty can contain potential as well as risk. Alongside purpose and possibility comes peace. Peace is often misunderstood as the absence of difficulty, but true peace is something deeper. It is the ability to remain grounded even when life becomes challenging. It is the confidence that setbacks do not erase worth, and that uncertainty does not eliminate hope. A transformed mindset creates this kind of peace because it is no longer dependent on perfect circumstances. It is rooted in perspective, resilience, and trust in one's ability to navigate change. As negative thinking loses its influence, emotional energy becomes available for more meaningful pursuits. Instead of constantly defending against imagined failures, the mind can focus on creating, learning, building, and connecting. Instead of replaying old disappointments, it can invest attention in future possibilities. Life begins to feel less like a struggle against limitations and more like a journey toward potential. The transformation of the mind does not happen in a single moment. It is built through repeated choices, daily awareness, and consistent effort. Yet each step forward reveals new opportunities, deeper purpose, greater confidence, and a growing sense of peace, allowing a person to move through the world with renewed vision, stronger determination, and an unwavering belief in the possibilities that still await discovery.